fight one, at most, local war. And therefore, the alliance has to understand that if it wants Greece in NATO, it has to protect its frontiers. It has to either do that or permit it to develop its forces in facing the threat from the east.
Well, now you're making it sound much more like a negotiating position than it appears from your manifesto. But can I move on?
No, you cannot. You cannot move on. I do not agree that it is a negotiating position. It is the position of the Greek people. You belong to an alliance which has to guarantee your frontiers. NATO does not. NATO supplies Turkey with the weapons to threaten the Aegean, threaten Greece in the Aegean. 120,000 troops called the Aegean Army, 150 landing craft. Is this for the Black Sea or for the Aegean?
There have been reports and talk here about Colonel Gaddafi having financed your election campaign, partially, and also it appears that you're going to officially recognize diplomatically the PLO. Some people think that perhaps what you're really after is moving Greece a bit away from looking so much to Western Europe and more towards looking to the East. Now, is that an accurate picture?
Well, it is not accurate at all. Insofar as the first is concerned, our party does not accept funds, but from its members. We are not a rich party, but we have enough members, close to 100,000, who are fully capable of financing the party's activities. Second, insofar as the recognition of PLO is concerned, we consider it a matter of honor, first of all, to recognize the struggle of the Palestinian people, with whom we have solidarity. We make it very clear that just as we are prepared to say that Israel must have a state of its own, guaranteed, so do the Palestinians. They must also have their state also guaranteed. And the mission of the PLO, the diplomatic mission, will have the same rank in Greece that the Israeli mission has in Greece.
I must move on because we only have a short time to cover several points. Can I just ask you about Cyprus? You've said repeatedly you think that not only should the Turkish army withdraw from Cyprus, but that the British sovereign bases in Cyprus should also be withdrawn before there can be peace. Is that still your position, and how would the British withdrawal in any way help achieve a solution?
The fundamental point is that the Cyprus issue has been misrepresented and misstated by the international community. It is not an issue between the two communities. That is something that can easily be resolved by the United Nations. And I'm quite prepared to say that we will offer the Turkish community, the Greek Cypriots, whatever is offered in terms of rights and obligations to the Greek side. The problem of Cyprus is occupation. A foreign country has invaded violently and occupied part of Cyprus, almost 40%. The issue in Cyprus is one of a violation of the territorial integrity of a state member of the United Nations.
So what about the British bases?
The British bases, it seems to me, if Cyprus is to remain non-aligned, as it is committed to do, have no place in Cyprus. Cyprus is an independent state. What role do the British bases have in Cyprus? I ask.
Can I ask you about another major plank of your policy, which you described as being a recommendation that Greece should pull out of the EEC, and you said you were going to call for a referendum here. Now, this is of considerable interest, obviously, in Britain, where the Labour Party is taking a similar view there without the referendum. Now, are you going to call for a referendum? And are you going to urge people in Greece to vote for Greece to pull out?
In Greece, there is a peculiarity. The government does not have the right to call for a referendum.
It can call for it. The president has to agree.
No, it cannot.
But you can ask for one.
I can ask for one.
Well, precisely.
But it is absolutely within the powers of the president. I have not had the opportunity yet to speak with him. It is our intent to put the matter before him. If he decides negatively, he is within his constitutional rights. If, therefore, there is no referendum, we do intend, and I have made this clear to members of the European Commission, to indicate which part of the agreement between Greece and the EEC has to be overrun, put aside, in order to give a chance to Greece to have a self-reliant development.
It sounds again like renegotiation, not the radical move that you propose in your manifesto.
What did Britain do when it did not face part of its financial obligations to the budget of the community? What did Germany do? What does France do? What does Italy do? Little Greece will do the same.
Mr. Papandreou, you were imprisoned here under the colonels for a time, and many members of your cabinet were imprisoned and
Yes.
some of them tortured by the army
Yes.
just over 10 years ago. Can you be sure that the army won't intervene here when you start putting through the socialist program that you're calling for?
The armed forces today, I can assure you, and I say this honestly, not merely for public relations purposes, is absolutely loyal. There may be some remnants in the army that are not loyal, but the armed forces in their totality are definitely loyal, and a guarantee, I would say, that the democratic institutions of this country will be maintained. The fact that we, a socialist party, took power and there has been such a smooth transition is proof of what I say.
But isn't the reality for any Prime Minister of Greece that the army here considers it has the right to intervene if it doesn't like the way that domestic politics are going, or if it feels that Greece is being threatened from outside and that the government isn't coping?
In my arrival at the Pentagon, when I took over the Ministry of Defense, I made very clear that while every officer is entitled to have his own political views, it is not permitted within the army to have political positions or to use the army for anything else than its task.
You're not looking over your
the
shoulder?
protection of the territorial integrity of the country.
You're not in some of these modified policies you've been talking about this evening, looking over your shoulder to the army and making sure that they square with what the army would want?
I am interested, of course, to find out what the implications for the capability of our armed forces is in case we do this or do that. I have to take account of the need to maintain a high level of readiness in the armed forces. And this is clearly part of the policy package. I have actually stated months ago to the party that none of these moves, NATO, bases, none of these moves will ever be taken if in any way they weaken the capability of the nation to defend itself.
Prime Minister, thank you very much. And that ends this Panorama programme from Athens. From all of us here until next Monday night, good night.
For your country, Mr. Prime Minister, your initial goal, as I believe you stated, it was to modernize Greece. You promised substantial changes in the way Greece was governed, its outlook, and so forth. What changes of this sort have you managed to accomplish in your first year?
Heretofore, I think we have done a great deal in the 12 months. I shall start probably by what I consider to be the most important change, which is decentralization and a struggle against the bureaucracy of Athens. The extent of centralization that exists in Greece cannot even be conceived in the United States or in Western Europe. And in this fashion, everything in the countryside, anywhere in Greece, depends on some minister's signature, some bureaucrat's signature. So our first big battle is to decentralize to the communities, to divisions, administrative divisions that are like the counties in the United States, and hopefully compartments later on, dividing Greece in 10 or 11 compartments. Transferring to these institutions not only competencies from the center, but also funds, or giving them, we haven't done that yet, some tax authority. We have also struggled hard with the bureaucracy in the center, reducing the number of signatures required, which was 7 for anything to be valid, to 3. And this, I think, is a very simple but important step. At the same time, beyond our support of local government, in which we believe very strongly, because that's citizen participation. And by the way, excuse me if I link it up to also democratic programming of the economic development of the country, which for the first time starts from propositions, proposals, and ideas that come from the regions, from the cities, from the counties, and then are put together in a sensible national plan. Our second move was to democratize unions. The unions in Greece were paternalistic, heavily dependent on the government. In fact, even the funds that they had at their disposal depended on the Minister of Labor. So we have offered, I think, the labor movement in Greece the most democratic law for trade unions that exists in Europe. In fact, it's so democratic that we may have problems ourselves. In respect to the university system in Greece, which is antiquated, antediluvian, which is really dominated by a professorial establishment of the old style. There we have brought about no less than a revolution, in the sense that now the students have about equal participation with the professors on all issues that refer and relate to academic life. Beyond that, we have turned our attention to youth. For the first time, we have created a ministry for youth. This, beyond athletics, involves all aspects of a young man's life. So far, we don't have a drug problem, but we're afraid that we may get one. And we are taking our measures now, before it's too late.
Mr. Prime Minister, all of this seems very positive, and I wonder whether the U.S. itself, which is, of course, one of Greece's allies, whether the U.S. has anything to fear from Greek socialism.
Well, insofar as internal developments are concerned, we are building our own Greek type of socialism, which is basically oriented toward decentralization and citizen participation. That is to say, democratic, democracy in depth is our interpretation, in the end, of what Greek socialism means. The United States, of course, and we are linked in a variety of ways. That has to do with defense, that has to do with foreign policy, and I'd like to pinpoint the points of contact. One of them is the participation of Greece in the Atlantic Alliance. The other one is the presence in Greece of American bases. And maybe a third dimension yet is position, policies on the great international questions of the day. So indeed, we have three quite separate, but not unrelated, links with the United States. As I have said in the past, in other interviews and statements, we started with rather a bad heritage. This bad heritage has to do with a 7-year dictatorship, which unfortunately was supported by NATO and by the then United States government. Second, we have the tragedy of Cyprus, where an ally of ours, Turkey, using NATO and American weapons, violating congressional rules, invaded and occupied 36.4% of Cyprus. It's true that those two developments historically created a strong feeling in Greece, especially in view of the fact that Greece had been in the two wars an ally, and in the Second World War a critical ally. for it was the one that delayed Hitler's attack in the Soviet Union. Greeks felt that the preference shown for Turkey strategically, the unwillingness to deal with Turkey in a somewhat more direct and harsh way in relation to the Cyprus invasion and occupation,